accelerated mixed martial arts training, striking master move series. Accelerated MMA training. In this video series, I'm going to discuss, in theory, an important subject in combat that I refer to as strategies and tactics. Strategies and tactics is a section of combat that we define as your overall game plans and tactics and techniques that you're going to use in order to deal with very special and specific situations and scenarios. All right, now this section of combat is very, very big in scope, but it's also very complex. So what I want to do today is I want to talk about the areas that it covers, but then I'm going to narrow it down to a specific area of combat that can be applied to self-defense situations and also sport combat situations. But today I'm going to discuss how it applies in sport combat situations because it's a little easier to understand. Okay, the strategies and tactics section in combat covers special situations and usually people who have training. What that means is that you learn how to deal with specific psychological traits, certain people who that fight a certain way. You also learn how to deal with style-specific strategies. In other words, how do you fight, a jiu-jitsu specialist? How do you fight a precision boxer? How do you fight a, a taekwondo specialist? It also covers how to deal with, fighting somebody with special attributes that may have an advantage. Like, for example, you have three types of body types: ectomorph, endomorph, as mesomorph, right? So all those, may play a role in somebody's, ability to be effective. So this is a very huge section and can be very complex. What we want to do here is narrow it down today, at least in this video, and talk about the section what I call the 5 types of fighters. Now the 5 types of fighters is also we define as what we call archetypes. And before I actually get into defining what each fighter is, I'm going to go ahead and kind of get into what an archetype it is and what it is not. Now this section, I believe, is really important and often overlooked in a lot of martial art training. And it's very important when you're dealing with sport fighting in particular, because there are a wide variety of combat, prize fighters, and there also are a lot of different types of weight classes as well. And this has a huge advantage if you understand what these 5 types of fighters are. So before I get into, the 5 types of fighters in detail, talk about their common traits, let's go ahead and kind of talk about what the archetypes are. Okay, archetype is defined as the origin or the original pattern where something comes from. Alright, so what that means is, when it applies to a combat situation, I said there's 5 types of fighters, or 5 types of archetypes. And the archetype is a specific trait that somebody either is born with or somebody inherits through living, or they've developed through just psychological training, or they've picked up through, just life. And each one of these is a lot different. And what they're emotional they're emotional programs that are directly hardwired to a human being that are based on their fear of survival. So in other words, everybody kind of has a specific way that they look at life, and when things are potentially a threat in life, and usually when people are threatened, it's about survival, my survival's in jeopardy, they're going to respond immediately in several ways. So, and what that kind of means is, like, people are going to, either, when they're threatened in some way, they're either going to take action very, very quickly. It's kind of like when you touch a hot stove. If everybody knows if they put their hand near a hot flame or something like that, or a fire, they're instantly going to pull their hand back, right? There's an immediate signal that goes right into the person's brain that tells them to, that I don't like that, right? Well, that's kind of technically what an archetype is. There is really such a fast thinking process, and it's really not words. It's more about feelings and emotions that directly makes a person respond in several ways. And some of those ways can be anger, rage. Some of that can be very fearful, passive. In other words, somebody who's feels like their survival's in jeopardy. They may try to jump on the threat right away and try to take action, be very aggressive and squash the situation. Or somebody else may be very passive and try to say, I don't want anything to do with that, and usually try to find a way to detour around it. So the archetypes are really something that is hardwired to a person's mind, and they're really unconscious thoughts that were conscious at one point, and somehow you've pushed them in the background of your mind, and they're kind of there, lingering in the background, and then when they are triggered, they pop up to the foreground, and a response comes out. So when applying this in a fighting situation, there are basically several ways that people are going to take action in a fighting situation. And usually in a fighting situation, they're going to be put under one of three things: fear, frustration, or pain. So let's go ahead and talk about now the 5 types of archetypes that you may face in a situation. Now, like I said before, I'm going to kind of address this more towards the sport aspect of it because it's a little easier to understand. Okay, let's go ahead and kind of talk about the archetypes and the 5 different ones and kind of how that applies in a sports situation. And the reason why I want to use a sports situation as an example as opposed to the street is because sport combat is obviously a prolonged combat. And when people are fighting in a prolonged bout, most of the time, whatever seems to work for them the most, whatever seems to give them the advantage the most, or how they've won, they're probably going to rely on that same idea over and over. Whether that's a strategy or a certain technique, irregardless, is that they're going to probably use that many times in order to gain the advantage, or make them think they got the advantage, right? Or a specific style, they may fight a certain way that makes them feel more in control, right? So when you're talking about the archetypes, when somebody is under duress, they are going to respond in a certain pattern every single time because, once again, it has to do with their survival. So if they feel threatened and they feel like they need to run and get away, they're probably going to do that over and over. You go at somebody and they don't want anything to do with you, they'll usually leave, and that's one way that could happen. Or they can be very aggressive and try to jump in on a threat every single time. And the more that the fight goes on, and the more that they feel that their survival is in jeopardy, they're usually going to rely on the same kind of pattern over and over and over. And that's how you kind of start to see the archetype. So what I usually say is, when you watch a sport combat situation, is when you watch two fighters, you got to watch this real carefully, is try not to pay attention to the commentator. Don't listen to what he's really saying, is watch the fighters specifically. And what I usually do is I watch one fighter at a time. And I'm watching both of them, but I watch one, and I watch how he responds every time he usually gets, attacked, and it hits him or hurts him. And I watch him real carefully, and I look for the common ways that he attacks. Right? Then I watch the other person, and I watch the same thing and look for the common way that he responds when he's attacked. Right? And then I kind of just watch the whole thing as a whole, and then I can kind of find out what the archetype is really quick. Now I want to add one thing here. It's important you understand that the techniques themselves, whatever fighter, whatever techniques they're using, to define the archetype has nothing to do with the techniques. It doesn't matter if they're throwing punches, kicks, grappling, weapons. It has nothing to do with that. Right? It has to do with their immediate response to threat. Okay? Now, some people are going to say, well, I train in a certain style, and that style is to be, very aggressive. And some styles kind of can mimic an archetype. Certain styles promote certain ways of fighting, right? Certain styles are very aggressive, some styles are more passive in nature, right? But just because a person is training in a certain style of martial arts doesn't mean that that's their archetype. Somebody can be trained in a very aggressive martial art, but they're really a real pacifist. Right? So, like I said, the archetype is really how they really are. It's like that you can disguise yourself to be a certain fighter, but underneath that costume is your real origin, and that's what you're trying to find when you're looking for these archetypes. All right? Otherwise, I want to figure out, as soon as I possibly can, what are your real responses? How do you really respond to threat? You can be trained, to fight a certain way. And I want to try to get past that as much as I possibly can and find out who the real person is underneath that training. Now, the more calm and collective, the more experience somebody has, they can hide that more and more in their training, and that just comes through experience. All right, so let's go ahead and define the 5 types of fighters here. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the definitions of the 5 different types of fighters and talk about kind of their common traits. Now, like I said before, in a sport competition, because you have 2 ready adversaries who know something about each other, right? The bout's obviously prolonged because it's sport. You have 6 months to get prepared for the fight. You've watched video footage on your opponent. You know his wins. You know his losses. You know how his style. You know what techniques he favors. Maybe. What he doesn't do very well. All those kind of play a role in kind of determining to some degree of the archetype. It doesn't guarantee, but it kind of gives you an idea, right? So the other thing here is that when you're dealing with the archetypes, figuring out it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what age they are. It doesn't matter what gender they are. It doesn't matter what ethnic background they are. That has nothing to do with it. Remember, it's the immediate response to threat is what you're looking for that determines the archetype, and particularly if they repeat that same idea. Okay? Alright, so there are 5 types, and we're going to classify them into these. Chargers, runners, blockers, sluggers, and the 5th one is what we call a synergist. Okay? Chargers, runners, blockers, sluggers, and what we call a synergist. Now the first 4 we're going to talk about up front, and then I'll explain the synergist as we go on, because that's something that we want to keep separate kind of in application, because he's not really a type. Well, we say 5 types of fighters because it's just easier for teaching's sake. All right, so let's talk about the first 4. All right, the first archetype that I want to talk about is what we call a charger. Now, a charger archetype is, in my opinion, the most dangerous to deal with if you don't know what you're dealing with. And the reason why we say he's the most dangerous is because he has the element of surprise in his favor. All right, what that means is that the charger is somebody who is going to use just sheer aggression and rage to explode at you as fast as they possibly can. They're a type of fighter that tries to leap in on the threat as fast as they can and just overwhelm you. All right? So if you think about it kind of in a mutual combat situation in here, a charger usually is going to try to use his inertia in here and cover ground in here really fast and hit you with overwhelming attacks. Okay? So, I mean, he can just boom, bam, or come out of nowhere like that, right? And that's a major advantage in anyone who's classified as a charger, is because they don't give you any time to set up, right? You get out here in the middle of the ring and all of a sudden, boom, 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 he's all over you here with punches, kicks, grappling, and the fight's over before you know it, all right? So that's why we consider him the most dangerous if you aren't ready for that initial, that surprise, because he can just explode on you like a bunch of bees, okay? Now, some of his common traits are these. First of all, you know he's coming, all right? His predictability rate is really high. Not in as far as his techniques he's throwing. All right, remember I said the archetypes have nothing to do with the techniques they're throwing, but you know the fact that he's coming. A charger is always going to probably leap in on a threat every single time. It doesn't matter what range he fights in here. He can be way out here like this or right on your doorstep in here, but he's coming in here real fast, all right? The other thing, the trait of him, is that he gets his power through locomotion, through weight transfer, through inertia. He's not a power puncher per se. That's something different. All right? So he's not necessarily trying to knock you out with one punch. He could try, but he's mostly trying to overwhelm you. Right? He constantly keeps coming at you in here. Right? The other thing that you can notify a charger is he usually, if he's good, has predatory-like footwork. And what that means is that a charger needs to be very mobile in here. And what he can do is that when he comes at you in here like this, if you try to sidestep him in here, he's real fast, about changing direction in here real quick. If he's, more trained. It doesn't mean that that's what he's going to do, but usually a charger can keep, moving at you kind of with a little tic-tac footwork. So he can explode forward in here like this. He can usually change direction in here if you try to get away from him in here. And what's going to happen is that usually, if you can't stop him by stopping and intercepting with him, you're usually going to have to ride out that storm and then fight going backwards. And if he can't get you and take you out in the first couple seconds, he's going to try to repeat that situation again. Okay, so that's kind of a cut and dry scenario of the charger, right? He's usually very loaded and ready to go in here like this. Right? So he could come at you with punches, kicks, grappling, a combination of all of them. It doesn't really matter. He could be technique based, but usually it's going to be kind of rage based. So they're very busy in order, to leap at you in here, right? So now, like I said, why it's easier to see this stuff in sport versus the street is because in the street usually don't have time to prepare and set up in a strategy. Usually in the street, it's over in a couple punches, someone sucker punches in here, right? So in the street, we say it's much harder to find an archetype. You get in an argument in a street situation, a self-defense situation, and someone just goes boom and tries to hit you in here like this, right? You can't say, well, that guy was a charger, right? You don't really know, right? He may have talked himself into just sucker punching you real fast, or he could have been a charger, or maybe he was just scared at something he did, right? But because it happens so fast, you don't really have time to kind of analyze your opponent, it's very hard to determine the charger. But here's the rule. We always assume the charger first and foremost until proven otherwise. So if this is a street situation, you definitely want to assume you're dealing with a charger. Always assume this person's going to come at you and try to get the jump on you until proven otherwise. So if he doesn't come at you right off the bat, and you can escape, get your hands up and, move, whatever, great, right? Now, then it makes it much easier. But worst case scenario, right, you don't know what you're dealing with, so I'm assuming I'm dealing with a charger. Okay, the next archetype that I want to discuss is the opposite of the charger, is what we call a runner. Now, a runner archetype is defined as somebody who's going to move and hit and move. What that means is he's going to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, that type of thing. Okay, he's your Muhammad Ali, he's your Roy Jones Jr. Okay, now some of the greatest sport fighters ever were runners. All right, Ali, Floyd Mayweather, Roy Jones Jr., Shane Mosley, all those possess these runner traits. Now a runner is going to do the exact opposite of a charger. He is not going to leap in on a threat. He's actually going to stay away and actually draw you out. He would prefer that you come at him in here and he catch you on the way in, just like how Ali caught Sonny Liston with that famous phantom punch. Okay, he's not somebody who's going to try to take your head off in here. He may try to take in, hit you in here, but he's generally going to try to stay away and move, right? So a lot of the common traits that a runner does when he does move around is that usually he's going to use a lot of body evasion in here and a lot of footwork. As soon as you come at him in here like this, he's going to go and move in here and try to hit you offline and catch you coming on the way in. Okay? The other common trait that he does is that he's very unpredictable in when he's going to strike. And he can throw punches at weird angles because of the nature of the runner using body evasion. A lot of times a runner is not in balance all the time and anchored to the ground. Like a charger is more anchored to the ground because they need to be able to push off the earth more. Well, a runner is kind of the reverse. So a runner can be moving off balance. He can snap his head back and he can slip in here, and he can throw a punch at a weird angle in here and catch you coming in here like that. Okay? So he's usually going to stay really far out. He's not going to let you get in the pocket. He's going to stay really far out in here, and he's usually going to have a very good active jab. He's going to throw a jab out here like this, and he usually has a good rear cross in here to keep you off in here. He wants, lead with speed, follow with power. But he wants to do it, at a distance in here where you can't quite hit him in here like that, and he usually is going to leave immediately. Okay? So he's a type of archetype that doesn't want anything to do with force-on-force situation. Okay? Now another common trait that usually a runner possesses, is not always though, depending on the style of the fighter, is a runner usually is going to hold his hands usually lower. He's not going to be up in here like, conventional boxing, hands up, chin down. I mean, he may. And this doesn't really necessarily define the runner particularly, but like I said, it all depends on kind of the style of the fighter. But a lot of the good runners, particularly in boxing, usually had their hands down fighting in a low lead. And the reason why they did that in here is for several reasons. First reason is it's much more relaxed than having your hands up like this. Your trap's more relaxed, your form's more relaxed in here. Okay? The second reason is I can see better. Right? I'm not having to look through the gloves in here or over the gloves in here like this. A lot of times this can present problems as far as vision, even though it can present a lot of protection. So they can see the whole picture better here. They can see your feet, particularly in MMA when you need to see a kick or something like that. Okay? So it helps with vision. And the third advantage of it is that I can create an illusion in here, and I can throw techniques from weird angles. In other words, my hand may be down here like this, and I can move my lead hand out here further, and you may not see this rising jab right in your face in the last second. Right? I also can, fake in here, bam, bam, and hit you at different angles in here like that. So those are some of the common, three common traits there as far as their guard position for a runner. Okay? So, the runner needs an environment to move. All right? He needs to be able to stay away and move around. So, in a 30-foot octagon or a 20-something-foot boxing ring, he's got a major advantage, right? In a corner, small cage or an elevator, he's in trouble, right? He also, another advantage of the runner is that usually he is real good about avoiding any kind of direct contact. So like I said, he may use evasion and footwork in here like this, but if he's in trouble in here and he can't get out of the way, usually he's real good about rolling with the punches in here and then creating a flurry of techniques to get you off him real fast and getting away. So if he's in trouble, he may put together a swarm of punches that basically just pepper you to death and then get the heck out of there. So he's gonna move and hit in here, or he's gonna hit and move in here. One of those three things. So that's what we call a runner archetype. Okay, now I've gone through the charger and the runner. Let's talk about the third archetype. The third archetype is what we call a slugger. Now a slugger is defined as a stalk and destroy fighter. He is your basic KO specialist. Alright, so he's somebody who possesses the ability to knock you out with one punch. Alright, he has some similar traits to the charger as far as what he's trying to accomplish. He wants to end the fight immediately. He's coming at you. He's aggressive. He's tough, durable. But there's a couple things that he does differently than a charger, right? Unlike a charger who's trying to get his power through, weight transfer, inertia, or a charger, bam, bam, bam. will explode at you here with, you know, a series of swarming punches in here to get the jump on you fast and stun you, shock you. A slugger usually is going to try to set himself in more of a stance where he's loaded with a baseball bat, right? So a slugger is going to kind of more is get right on your doorstep as close as he possibly can, and he would prefer that he kind of hide behind his defenses more. So in other words, a slugger is going to be more kind of loaded with a bat because he wants to trade punches with you. He would prefer that you trade with him and he'd take your best hits and knock you out. All right? So he usually is going to get his power through weight transfer and leverage. Kind of like Mike Tyson. When Mike Tyson threw a punch in here, his whole body was set. When he threw a punch, it was boom in here like this, right? You know, his hook came around, wham in here like that. Right? He wasn't out here arm punching like so. So a slugger is usually, common trait with a slugger is that they're going to stalk you wherever you go. They're going to try to cut that ring off or not. Or they may just stand right in front of you, but they usually are not going to back up. They're going to take your hits in order to give one right back in here, right? Right? So that's real similar. Chargers real similar like that too. They usually can take punishment. And a slugger, usually you're going to have to really hurt them in order to make them, you know, back off, right? So your arm punches and your jabs are probably not going to do it against a really tough, you know, real slugger. All right. Another common trait that a slugger possesses is he usually does not have a jab. Not all the time, but most of them don't have any good straight punches. Most of them rely more on circular blows and haymakers, right? And the reason for that is because they're trying to get max power. So they're going to be more set in here, and usually they can be, you know, bobbing and weaving, or they're moving their head because they know that they're, you know, a standing pinata, and what they're going to try to do, you know, is throw, you know, a heavy punch in here, like it's, you know, big punches, big crosses, big overhands in here. Usually not going to have, you know, a good jab, all right? And so they're usually going to telegraph their techniques more in here because they're trying to knock you out with one big, you know, shot in here, okay? The other common trait that a slugger may possess is he may operate from what we call as more of a shield. And Mike Tyson did this a lot. He operated from that peekaboo stance in here like this. He used the gloves and kind of hid behind his arms. We kind of define that as a shield, right? And that doesn't mean a slugger is going to do that, but usually they're going to have some kind of protection in here so they can take your hits. So they can, if they can't, you know, bob and weave in here, they will roll with their hits and come right back. But a slugger may have different guard positions in here, right? So he may have his hands up loaded in here like this, or he may, you know, like you watch like Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier, you know, fought from this like horizontal shield in here, which is real common that we use, and it offers deception in here, different, you know, different lines of attack in here. And you may not see something coming up, bam, in this line in here, right? Or I can lash something out in here real fast, right? So a slugger usually kind of hides behind his guard more, his shields more, because he knows that he's going to take a punch, and he still wants to kind of protect himself to some degree and hit you right back and knock you out. Okay, so that's a common definition and some of the common traits of a slugger. Okay, the fourth archetype is what we call a blocker. Now, a blocker is a very tricky counter fighter. He has some similarities to the runner, but he's also very different. A blocker is a very precision, calculated timing fighter. What that means is that he is going to prefer, once again, like a runner, that you come at him first and initiate the attack, and that he try to take advantage of your openings. Now, unlike a runner, like I said, a runner is going to use more footwork and evasion and get out of the way in here like this and stay away. Right? A blocker is not going to run necessarily, but he's not going to leap in on the threat. He would prefer that he stand his ground a little bit and put himself in a maximum position of range and distance where he feels that you can't hit him, but he can time and defend your techniques in here and attack you. Right? So if you think, hence the term blocker, he's always going to try to defend himself first. That doesn't mean he's going to block necessarily per se. All right, and there's a lot of people out there are blockers. You know, you can go in a lot of martial art gyms and MMA gyms, and you can find a handful of people that are, you know, that's a blocker, hey, that's a slugger in here. But a lot of people block, and it's because it has to do with protecting yourself against survival, right? But it doesn't have to be, you know, conventional blocking. It could be shielding, covering, it could be evasion in here. It doesn't really matter. What matters is what he's trying to accomplish. But he preferred that he defend himself first and take advantage while you're open in here. Okay. So some of the common traits that a blocker possesses is that usually he's going to throw threatening punches out here, right, and try to, you know, get you to attack him. So he may fake or feint in here like this. Or he may just try to hit you in here with a non-committed technique, but he wants you to defend yourself, and then so he can time you, right? So, and the other thing about a blocker is that he is very, very in control of himself. He's usually not going to overcommit. You never really see a blocker just like try to leap in and try to take your head off like that. So he's very in control of his range in here. He can control the time distance very well, real well. The other advantage, or the trait of a blocker, is that his guard stance. A blocker is usually going to develop a specific guard stance that minimizes your ability to hit him and maximizes his ability to take advantage of your openings. Right, so usually a blocker can put his hands into what we call a cage, and what he can do is mentally he can say, well, you know, in order for you to hit me, you're going to have to come through, and I know that, or you're going to have to come around, and I know that, or down here. And what that allows him to do is it minimizes the chances of you really getting an easy strike. Right? So if I put my hands up in here like this, I can say, well, you know, basically, if you want to go around these bars, you're going to have to go around them, and I know that, and I can crack you right back in here. If you have to go down the center here, I can know that, I can parry and hit right back. Okay, or I can cover, I can just close off this gate here, right, and strike right back as well. All right? So a blocker can have almost like a guard, it's like a catcher's mitt, where they can kind of, up front, kind of put it where they want to be, so they have a better chance to react and respond. All right, another common trait of the blocker is he has very good indirect attack and broken rhythm. And what that means is that he can take advantage of the ability to screw with your timing. So he can make it look like he's trying to, you know, hit you in here like that, bam, in here, but he may, you know, throw a technique out here and then right at the last moment fake you and come around. Right? Or he may throw this punch in here and let you block it in here just in order to hit you in the body, boom, and then immediately pull us right back up and punch you in the face in here like that. Right? Which is basically a broken rhythm. So he's really good at using indirect attack. He's also really good at being stable. Right? So he's usually not a guy who gets knocked off balance too much in here. Like I said, he's in control of his range. Okay? So you got to be real careful with a blocker because you don't want to get into a trading match with him, particularly if he's fast and he's tricky, because he's always looking to stop you first. That's one of his disadvantages, right? He's always on the defense first in here. But he's also very, very clever in looking at your timing, your rhythm, and the specific ways that you attack, and he's going to take advantage of your unbroken rhythm. Okay? All right? So, blocker is somebody who's more defensive, not going to run away, he's not going to leap in on you. He prefers that you come at him and he defend himself in here and strike back in here and use unbroken rhythm and calculated timing in order to mess with your perception and timing. That's the definition of a blocker. Okay, the fifth and final archetype is what we call a synergist. So we've gone through chargers, runners, sluggers, and blockers. Now we're on the synergist. Now the synergist, I said before in the beginning that I would like to keep separate in theory, in concept, because a synergist is not really a type. A synergist is more of a person who has had a lot of experience in martial arts, and has a lot of experience in the archetypes themselves and all kinds of strategies and tactics, and really knows how to use whatever style or system that they're studying, knows how to really use everything when they see it's needed. So in other words, that a synergist is going to have his archetype. Right? Everybody has at least one or more of an archetype of the same pattern, right? So like you can kind of see here, like chargers and sluggers kind of go together. They're kind of similar, and blockers and runners kind of go together. So most of the time, if somebody's 90% charger, they're probably 10% slugger. I've never seen somebody who's 90% charger and then 10% a runner. That doesn't really make any sense. But a synergist is going to have his original archetype. But he has enough experience and he has enough control to know how to use his archetype to the best advantage possible. And he also knows how to defeat all the archetypes through basic techniques and tactics. And he also knows how to use each archetype as a means to an end. So he's going to use each one as a method in order to achieve the goal. It doesn't matter what archetype he is. If he's a charger by nature and he's in a sport combat situation, right, in an MMA situation, he may need to use the runner temporarily, only for 2 seconds, in order to gain the advantage, and then go right back to the charger archetype. Or he may have to use all of the archetypes to some degree. Right? So you can kind of see here that a synergist is somebody that develops this over time. Nobody's really born a synergist. Okay? Now the overall goal is to become a synergist. Right? That's the whole purpose of all this, is to learn about what archetype you are, learn how to perfect your archetype, learn all the tactics and techniques and the strategies to perfect your archetype, learn how to defeat your archetype, and learn how to defeat all the archetypes and become all the archetypes. So it's almost like you're a chameleon. That's the whole goal of being a synergist. Now, like I said at the beginning, this whole section of strategy and tactics is very, very big in scope, but it's also very complex. So it takes a lot of time to kind of go through, the archetype training and to kind of recognize this stuff. So it's one thing to learn how to kind of figure out what archetype you are. And I suggest, if you do figure out what archetype you are, is learn how to perfect your archetype. Okay? And then once you kind of perfect it, is learn how to, be the opposite of what you are. So if you're a slugger by nature, you want to learn how to become a blocker. And the point is that you can use the blocker strategy to disguise the slugger more. Even though you are naturally more the slugger, by learning how to become a blocker, you're going to actually become a better slugger. Most people, particularly in MMA, is that they have this style that they always use over and over and over. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But styles are limited because they only advocate one thing. And the problem with doing a style, training a style and using it over and over, particularly in like MMA, is that people figure it out. Right? So whether it's a kicking style or grappling style or whatever it is, a timing issue or something, a timing advantage, people learn how to do that. And the goal is learn how to be unpredictable as much as you possibly can. Right? So the thing with styles is that it may advocate one thing, but it doesn't advocate another thing, and that's the problem with studying a style. Right? And when people study multiple styles, they study a little bit of boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, that's basically what MMA is, right? And they're trying to take what they feel are the best techniques from all those different styles and then take a needle and thread and sewing it together and then trying to call it something. The problem with doing that is that a lot of those styles are diametrically opposite in nature. And there's nothing holding them together in the middle. There's no base. The other problem with training in a bunch of different styles like that and taking the techniques from other styles is that are those techniques that you're doing, are they really, really effective as far as body mechanics? I mean, are they following proper body mechanics? Right? So just because you take a kick from Taekwondo doesn't mean that you're maximizing your leverage with it. Right? There's all kinds of different ways to use punches and kicks. Right? And that's another section in strategy and tactics is, a charger is going to use his jab different than a runner may. Right? When I said earlier about the slugger, I said the slugger doesn't usually have a jab. Well, a good slugger will. So he's going to use it differently than maybe a blocker is going to use it. Okay? So again, this section is very broad in scope and it can be very complex. So I hope this helps. Try to figure out what archetype you are, learn how to make your archetype better, and learn how to use and become each archetype as well as defeat each archetype.
Look for future videos such as strategies and tactics and how to deal with the 5 types of fighters, the 12 most important strikes needed for MMA competition,